The mashed potatoes were still warm when my husband stood up at Thanksgiving dinner, smiled at 22 members of our family, and introduced his pregnant girlfriend. My mother was there. My 11-year-old daughter was there. The pastor who married us was sitting 3 chairs away. And I just sat there, holding a bread roll, thinking, I knew, and I still was not ready. He thought that night would break me. He thought I would cry, make a scene, and crawl away quietly while he rebuilt his life with her. He was wrong, because what nobody at that table knew, not him, not her, not even his own father, was that inside my purse were 3 envelopes. And by the time I opened the last one, the golden one, every lie he ever told would be dead on that dining table. This is how a quiet wife became the loudest truth in the room. Value statement. This story carries a message every woman deserves to hear. Your silence is not weakness. Your patience is not surrender. And the moment you stop letting someone else write your story is the moment your real life begins. If you have ever been made to feel small by someone who promised to love you, this one, it is for you. Call to action. If this story gave you chills, if it made you angry, if it made you feel seen, do me one small favor tonight. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for the next woman who needs to hear this at 2 a.m. when she thinks she is alone. Every subscribe, every like, every share pushes a story into the feed of someone who is right now sitting in the dark wondering if she is crazy. She is not. And your click might be the thing that tells her so. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us what would you have done at that Thanksgiving table. We read every single one.
The mashed potatoes were still warm when my husband introduced his pregnant girlfriend to my entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. 22 people, my mother, my 11-year-old daughter, the pastor who married us, and I just sat there, holding a bread roll, thinking I knew, and I still was not ready. But let me start from the beginning, because the truth is, the dinner was not the betrayal. The betrayal started 14 months earlier, on a Tuesday, with a receipt for flowers I never received. Claire Whitfield had what most people in Maplewood, Connecticut, would call the perfect life. A restored colonial house on Birch Lane with a wraparound porch and window boxes she planted every spring. A husband who coached Little League and shook hands at church like he was running for mayor. An 11-year-old daughter named Jessica who still believed the world was mostly good. And a teaching career at Maplewood Elementary where 23 third graders called her Mrs. W and fought over who got to hold her hand during fire drills. From the outside, it was a postcard. From the inside, Claire had started noticing the edges curling. It began with small things, the kind of things you explain away, because explaining them away is easier than admitting they mean something. Ethan checking his phone under the dinner table and tilting the screen just slightly when she glanced over. Ethan rolling away in bed when she reached for his hand, mumbling that he was tired from work. Ethan coming home smelling different, not like perfume, nothing that obvious, but like a different kind of soap. A different room. A different life. She told herself she was imagining things. She told herself 12 years of marriage meant something. She told herself that love was not a feeling, but a choice, and Ethan was simply going through a season. Then Jessica said something that cracked the whole illusion open. They were eating dinner on a Wednesday night. Ethan was late again. Jessica was pushing her green beans around her plate, and she looked up with those wide, serious eyes that made her look 40 years old instead of 11 and said, "Mom, why does Daddy smell different when he comes home late?" Claire laughed. She actually laughed and said something about how Daddy probably went to the gym. But after Jessica went upstairs to do homework, Claire stood at the kitchen sink for 7 minutes, gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white, and let the water run until it went cold. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She just stood there and thought, when did I start lying to my own daughter? On Sundays, the Whitfields sat in the third pew at Grace Community Church, where Ethan's father, Pastor David Whitfield, delivered sermons about integrity and the sanctity of family. Pastor David was a tall man with silver hair and a voice like warm gravel, the kind of man who made you feel safe and slightly judged at the same time. Ethan's mother, Eleanor, sat beside him, always smiling, always polished, always one step behind. After service, there were handshakes and potluck casseroles, and Ethan performing the role of devoted husband with Academy Award precision. He would put his arm around Claire in front of the congregation, kiss her temple, and say something like, "This woman is my rock." And Claire would smile because that is what she had been trained to do. Smile, support, stay quiet, be grateful. Here is something nobody tells you about marriage. The most dangerous moment is not when things go wrong. It is when you stop noticing that things stopped being right. When your husband's hand on your shoulder starts to feel like staging instead of affection. When you realize you have not had a real conversation, not about schedules or groceries, but a real, honest-to-God conversation. In months. Pay attention to that. Not because you are paranoid, because you deserve to be seen by the person who promised to see you. Claire's best friend was a woman named Meg Holloway, and Meg was everything Claire was not. Loud where Claire was quiet. Blunt where Claire was diplomatic. The kind of woman who showed up to book club with a bottle of red wine and announced, "We are reading that divorce thriller this month. I brought visual aids." Everyone laughed. Claire laughed too. But the word divorce landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples did not stop for days. It was Meg who found the first real clue. Claire's car was at Tom's shop. Tom being Claire's older brother, a quiet mechanic who lived above his garage and communicated primarily through grunts and acts of service. Meg had borrowed Ethan's car to pick up cupcakes for the school bake sale. In the glove compartment, tucked between an insurance card and a gas receipt, was a jeweler's receipt, $4,200, a gold pendant necklace. Claire's birthday had been 3 months ago. Christmas was 2 months away. Meg sat in the parking lot of the bakery and stared at that receipt for a full 5 minutes. Then she took a photo of it and spent the next week pretending everything was fine while guilt gnawed a hole through her stomach. She tried to talk herself out of it. Maybe it was for Claire, and he was planning early. Maybe he returned it. Maybe there was an explanation that did not end with Claire's heart in pieces on the kitchen floor. But Meg knew. The way women know. The way your body tells you something is wrong before your brain catches up. On Wednesday morning, at their regular coffee spot, Meg slid the photo across the table. Claire picked up her phone and looked at it. Her expression did not change. She set the phone down and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "He probably got me something and forgot to give it," Claire said. Meg leaned forward. "Claire, $4,000. You would have noticed a $4,000 necklace. Maybe he returned it. Maybe you need to stop making excuses for a man who makes you feel like you need to." The silence between them lasted 8 seconds. Claire changed the subject to Jessica's science project. Meg let her, because sometimes friendship means knowing when to push and when to wait. But that night, after Jessica was asleep and Ethan was in his home office with the door closed, Claire opened the laptop and logged into their joint credit card account. She scrolled through 3 months of transactions. Everything looked normal, almost suspiciously normal. Then she found it, a charge for $4,200, listed as office supplies. Her hands began to shake. She closed the laptop slowly, like it might bite her, and sat in the dark living room, listening to the sound of her husband typing behind a closed door. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself she was being crazy. When you find something suspicious and your first instinct is to explain it away, that instinct is not trust. It is fear. Trust asks questions. Fear makes excuses. And Claire had been making excuses for so long she had forgotten what a question even sounded like. But the receipt was there. The number was real. And somewhere in Maplewood, Connecticut, a woman Claire had never met was wearing a $4,000 necklace that should have been hers. Claire spent the next 6 days pretending she had not seen the receipt. She cooked dinner. She graded papers. She drove Jessica to soccer practice and sang along to the radio and acted like her world had not developed a hairline fracture that was spreading a little more each hour. But the pretending was exhausting, like holding your breath underwater and smiling at the same time. On a Thursday afternoon, she made a decision that felt brave and stupid in equal measure. She drove to Ethan's office to bring him lunch, turkey club, extra pickles, his favorite. She told herself it was a nice thing to do. She told herself she was being a good wife. The truth was she needed to see his world with her own eyes, because the world he described at home was starting to feel like fiction. Ethan worked at Whitfield Commercial Properties, a mid-size real estate firm in a glass building downtown. Claire had been there 100 times for holiday parties and client dinners, but she had never shown up unannounced. It felt strange, almost like trespassing in her own marriage. The receptionist, a young woman named Dana, looked up when Claire walked in, and her expression did something complicated. A flash of something. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. It lasted half a second before Dana smiled and said, "Oh, Mrs. Whitfield, hi. He is actually in a meeting right now." Claire said she would wait. She sat on the gray leather couch in the lobby and held the sandwich bag on her lap and told herself this was fine. Normal wives brought their husbands lunch. This was a normal thing to do. 20 minutes passed. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, and beside him was a woman Claire had never seen before. She was in her early 30s, with dark blonde hair and a confident smile, wearing a fitted navy blazer and, around her neck, a delicate gold pendant necklace. $4,200, hanging right there in the open. Claire's stomach dropped so fast she thought she might be sick, but she stood up and smiled, because that is what Claire Whitfield did. She smiled. "Hey," she said, her voice light and steady. "I brought you lunch." Ethan did not flinch, not even a flicker. He walked over, kissed her cheek, and said, "Babe, this is Natalie Carr, our new project coordinator. Natalie, this is my beautiful wife, Claire." Natalie extended her hand. Her grip was warm and firm. She said, "I have heard so much about you. Ethan talks about you and Jessica all the time." Claire looked at the necklace. She looked at Natalie's eyes, which were green and steady and held no trace of guilt. She looked at Ethan, who was smiling the way he smiled at church, the way he smiled at clients, the practiced smile of a man who had rehearsed every moment of his life. "It is so nice to meet you," Claire said. She drove home. She did not eat the turkey club until she was sitting in the garage with the engine off, staring at the wall, chewing mechanically, without tasting anything. She called Meg. I went to his office. "And? There is a woman?" "She is nice." "Nice does not mean safe, Claire. I think I am just being crazy." There was a long pause. When Meg spoke again, her voice was lower, the joking gone, replaced by something raw and protective. "Claire, you are the least crazy person I know. And the fact that you think you are crazy is exactly what worries me." Claire hung up. She went inside, heated up leftover pasta for Jessica, helped with homework, kissed Ethan goodnight when he came home at 9:30. Everything normal, the house was warm, the routine was intact, the lie was perfect. But that night she lay in the dark and listened to her husband breathe and thought, what if the life I built is just the life he let me believe in? The next 2 weeks were the loneliest of Claire's life. She did not hire a private investigator. She did not confront Ethan. She did not do any of the things people do in movies, because real life is not a movie. In real life, betrayal does not arrive with a soundtrack. It arrives at 3 a.m. when you are lying awake, Googling signs your husband is cheating, and feeling pathetic about it. She lost 5 pounds because she could not eat. She snapped at Jessica over spilled orange juice and then locked herself in the bathroom and cried for 20 minutes, hands pressed over her mouth so her daughter would not hear. She almost told her mother during a Sunday phone call, but the words got stuck somewhere between her throat and her pride, and she ended up talking about the weather instead. She accidentally sent a text meant for Meg to the school parent group chat. It said, "Do you think he is sleeping with her?" 30 seconds of pure, blood-draining horror before she typed, "Wrong chat, sorry," talking about a TV show. 3 parents hearted the message. Meg texted privately, "Which TV show? Claire? Which one?" Claire replied, "Shut up, I am dying." She almost laughed. Almost. Tom noticed something was wrong when he came to drop off her car. He did not push. Tom never pushed. He was 6'2" and built like a truck, and expressed love through engine repairs and silence. He looked at Claire, saw something broken behind her eyes, and said, "You know where I am." Then he left his favorite wrench on her kitchen counter, an old joke between them that meant, "I am here if things need fixing." It was Meg who finally took action. She knew a man named Ray Dalton, a private investigator in his 50s who had done surveillance work for her cousin's custody case. Ray was a retired cop with a dry sense of humor and a face that looked like it had seen every bad decision a person could make and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Meg set up the meeting without telling Claire, then dragged her there under the pretense of trying that new diner on Route 9. When they walked in and Ray was sitting at a booth with a black coffee and a manila folder, Claire turned to Meg and said, "This is not a diner." Meg said, "No, it is an intervention. Sit down." Ray looked at the receipt photo and the credit card statement Claire had finally printed and kept folded in her wallet, like a secret she was not ready to read out loud. "Look, kid," he said, his voice gravelly and unhurried. "Maybe it is nothing, but nothing does not usually cost $4,000 and get filed under office supplies." Claire stared at the table. "I do not want to be the kind of wife who spies on her husband." Ray leaned forward. "I am not asking you to assume the worst. I am asking you to find out the truth. Those are 2 very different things." Claire looked at Meg, who was gripping her coffee mug with both hands and trying very hard not to say, "I told you so." "Fine," Claire whispered. "Find out." Ray nodded, slid a business card across the table, and said, "I will be in touch. And kid, if it is nothing, I will be the first one to say so." It was not nothing. Within 2 weeks, Ray had assembled a file that read like a horror novel written by an accountant. Photographs of Ethan and Natalie at a restaurant 2 towns over, his hand covering hers across the table, their faces close enough to share a breath. Records showing Ethan had rented an apartment 6 months earlier through a limited liability company registered under a business partner's name. A second phone, prepaid, registered to that same address. And then the photograph that broke everything open. Natalie Carr, walking out of an obstetrics clinic, her hand resting on a belly that was unmistakably, visibly pregnant, and in the parking lot, sitting in his car with the engine running, was Ethan. Ray placed the photos on his desk carefully, like he was handling something explosive, which he was. Claire sat across from him. The photos were spread out, and she looked at each one and did not make a sound. Then she said, very quietly, "How pregnant?" Ray's voice was gentle. "Looks like 5, maybe 6 months." Claire did the math. 6 months ago was their 12th anniversary trip to Cape Cod. The trip Ethan had cut short because of a work emergency. She had spent the last day of that trip walking the beach alone, collecting shells for Jessica, telling herself that work emergencies happen, and she should not take it personally. 6 months. He had been building another life for 6 months while sleeping beside her every night. She stood up. She thanked Ray. She walked to her car in the parking lot of his office. She drove to the elementary school, empty because it was Saturday. She parked in her usual spot, the one near the front door with the faded yellow lines, and she screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw and her chest ached, and the steering wheel was wet with tears she did not remember crying. Then she picked up her phone and called Tom. "I need you," she said. "I am coming," he said. He did not ask why. He did not ask what happened. He just came. The weeks between Claire's discovery and Thanksgiving passed in a fog of controlled devastation. She went to work. She taught fractions and guided reading. She packed Jessica's lunches with notes that said, "You are my sunshine, and I love you, bigger than the sky," and hoped her daughter could not read the desperation behind the marker ink. She had decided to confront Ethan after the holiday. She would do it privately, calmly, like an adult. She would present the evidence, request a divorce, and protect Jessica from as much damage as possible. She had a plan. The plan made her feel safe. The plan was worthless. Thanksgiving morning, Claire was in the kitchen by 6, turkey in the oven by 7, stuffing, green bean casserole, her grandmother's sweet potato recipe that she made every year because it was the one dish that made the whole house smell like childhood. Jessica made place cards with little drawings on them. A turkey for Grandpa David, a flower for Grandma Eleanor, a heart for Mom. 22 family members would be at the table. Claire's mother, Linda, was driving up from Hartford. Tom was coming, freshly showered and uncomfortable in a button-down shirt. Meg and her husband Paul would be there because the Holloways had nowhere else to go, and Claire would never let them eat Thanksgiving alone. Ethan's parents, aunts, uncles, cousins from both sides. The dining room was extended with a folding table draped in a white cloth that almost matched. Ethan was attentive all day, unusually so. He kept touching Claire's shoulder as he passed through the kitchen. He complimented the table setting 3 times. He told her mother she looked wonderful, and shook Tom's hand, and played catch in the backyard with Jessica, and the whole performance was so perfect that Claire almost believed it. Almost. She caught him checking his phone twice in the bathroom. She saw him step outside to make a call, and come back looking flushed and excited, not nervous. Excited. Like a man on the edge of something he had been planning for a long time, grace was said. Pastor David's voice rolled over the table like warm honey, thanking God for family and food and togetherness. Everyone said amen. Forks began to move. Conversation hummed. It was, by every visible measure, a beautiful Thanksgiving. Then Ethan stood up and tapped his glass with a knife. The room quieted. Ethan smiled, that wide, confident smile Claire used to love and now recognized as armor. "I want to say something," he began. "This family means everything to me, and I believe in honesty above all else." Claire's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "I have been keeping something from all of you, and it has been eating me alive. I need to come clean." Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. She thought, He is going to confess. Right here, in front of everyone. Oh, God. But it was not a confession. It was a coronation. I have met someone, Ethan said, his voice clear and steady, practiced. Her name is Natalie, and she is carrying my child. He walked to the front door of their home, the home Claire had painted and furnished, and filled with 12 years of memories, and he opened it. Natalie Carr stepped inside, wearing a cream-colored dress that showed her pregnant belly, looking terrified and beautiful and completely out of place. Ethan put his arm around her and faced his family. I know this is a shock, but I want to build an honest life going forward. I hope you can all welcome her. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Claire had ever heard. Her mother dropped a wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, and red spread across the wood like a wound. Tom stood up so fast his chair toppled backward and hit the wall. Pastor David's face went completely white. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Meg whispered a word that was not appropriate for church. And Jessica, 11 years old, sitting between her grandmother and her uncle. She looked at her mother with those wide, terrified eyes and whispered, "Mom, what is happening?" Claire did not scream. She did not throw anything. She did not collapse. She sat perfectly still, and the stillness was not strength. It was shock. The room was spinning, and her heartbeat was louder than any voice, and the edges of her vision were going dark, and she thought, very clearly, I am going to faint at my own Thanksgiving dinner, and that will be the most humiliating part of all of this. She did not faint. Tom crossed the room in 3 steps. He did not yell. He got within 6 inches of Ethan's face, and his voice came out low and steady and terrifying. You have 10 seconds to get her out of this house before I do something your father is going to have to pray about. Ethan held up his hands, still smiling, still performing. Tom, let us be adults about this, Tom said. 1. Pastor David stood, his voice shaking. Ethan, this is not the time or the place. Ethan turned to his father. The time and the place? You have been telling me my whole life to protect the family image. Well, this is me being honest for once. This is me choosing truth. The hypocrisy hung in the air like smoke. But only Ethan and his father knew exactly what it meant. Not yet. That revelation would come later. Meg grabbed Claire's hand under the table. We are leaving, she said firmly. But Claire did not move. She looked at Jessica, whose lower lip was trembling, who was trying so hard to be brave and not understanding why she needed to be. And something shifted inside Claire. Something cracked and then hardened into something new. She stood. She walked to her daughter. She knelt down, so they were eye to eye, and said, Jess, baby, let us get your coat. We are going to Uncle Tom's tonight. Everything is going to be okay. Jessica whispered, Is Daddy leaving us? Claire's throat closed. She pulled her daughter against her chest and said, We are going to be fine, I promise. If you are ever blindsided in public by someone you trusted, you do not have to respond in that moment. Silence is not weakness. Silence is buying yourself time. You do not owe anyone a reaction on their schedule. Breathe. Leave when you are ready. The world can wait. They left. Claire carried Jessica's coat and her grandmother's sweet potato casserole because she was not leaving that behind. Tom walked them to his truck. Meg followed in her car. Nobody spoke. Halfway to Tom's apartment, Claire pulled over at a gas station. She opened the door and vomited on the asphalt. Jessica unbuckled her seatbelt and climbed into the front seat and held her mother's hair back. An 11-year-old girl holding her mother's hair in a gas station parking lot on Thanksgiving night. That was the image that would stay with Claire forever. Not Natalie's dress, not Ethan's smile. Her daughter's small hands, gentle and steady, doing what no child should ever have to do. Claire spent that night on Tom's couch. Jessica slept in Tom's bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit she had grabbed on the way out. Tom slept in his truck in the parking lot below, because he said the couch was too soft, and Claire knew he was lying, but loved him too much to argue. Meg arrived at 7 the next morning with coffee, pajamas, and a legal pad. She sat on the floor beside Claire and said, "Kay, we are going to make a plan. Because plans are what we do when the world falls apart." Claire nodded. She felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything inside her clean and left only the shell. But she could think, she could plan, she had evidence, she had Ray's file. She would find a lawyer, file for divorce, and build a new life for herself and Jessica. She thought the worst was over. She was catastrophically wrong. 48 hours after Thanksgiving, Claire drove to her house on Birch Lane to get clothes for herself and Jessica. She walked up the porch steps she had swept 1,000 times, put her key in the lock, and the key did not turn. She tried again. She tried the back door. She peered through the living room window, and there in the hallway, beside the coat rack she had bought at a flea market in Vermont, was a suitcase she had never seen before. Natalie's suitcase. Ethan had changed the locks. He had moved his pregnant girlfriend into their family home. Claire called him. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and measured, the voice of a man who had practiced this conversation. "Claire, my attorney advised me to secure the property. You left voluntarily on Thanksgiving. That constitutes abandonment." "Abandonment?" "You brought your pregnant girlfriend to our dinner table. I think we should communicate through lawyers from now on." He hung up. Claire stood on the porch of her own home, the home where she had painted Jessica's bedroom yellow with silver stars on the ceiling, the home where she had hung family photos up the staircase, one for every year of marriage, the home where she had planted tulips along the walkway every spring because her grandmother had told her that tulips mean new beginnings. She could not get in. Jessica's favorite stuffed rabbit, the second one, the one that stayed on her bed, was inside. Her grandmother's recipe box was inside. Her entire life was inside. And she was outside. If you ever leave your home during a marital crisis, even for one night, document it. Tell a friend in writing that you are leaving temporarily. Take photos of your belongings. Know your rights before you need them. Because the person you trusted most may be the one who uses your trust against you. The second catastrophe came 3 days later. Claire went to the bank to withdraw cash. Her card was declined. She tried the joint savings account online. The password had been changed. She called the bank, and a polite woman with a careful voice told her that the account had been converted to a single-holder account under Ethan Whitfield's name. Claire sat in her car outside the bank and checked her personal checking account. $212. 12 years of marriage, a husband who earned $300,000 a year, and she had $212. She texted Meg 2 words. He took everything. Meg texted back, "Come over, right now." At Meg's kitchen table, with coffee and the legal pad and a box of tissues nobody was pretending not to need, but they assessed the damage. Claire had no access to savings, no access to the house. Ethan had already hired Richard Cross, the most aggressive family attorney in the county, a man whose reputation was built on winning ugly and asking questions never. Tom reached into his back pocket and put $2,000 in cash on the table. He smoothed the bills flat with his calloused hands and said, "It is not much. It is what I have." Claire shook her head. "Tom, I cannot take your money. It is not a loan. It is what family does. Take it." The third catastrophe was the cruelest because it came not from Ethan, but from the town Claire had called home for 12 years. Ethan went on the offensive. Through his connections on the church board, the school board, and the town council, a narrative began to spread through Maplewood like poison through groundwater. Claire was unstable. Claire had abandoned the family home. Claire was keeping Jessica from her father out of spite. Claire was having a breakdown. Pastor David delivered a Sunday sermon about the destructive power of bitterness and the Christian duty of forgiveness. He did not mention Claire by name. He did not need to. Every person in those pews knew exactly who he was talking about. A colleague at school pulled Claire aside in the hallway on Monday. "People are saying things, Claire. I do not believe them, but you should know." The final blow landed on a Wednesday afternoon. Ethan filed a motion for primary custody of Jessica, citing Claire's erratic behavior and unstable living situation. She was, after all, living in a one-bedroom apartment above her brother's auto repair shop. The filing painted a picture of a woman falling apart while a stable, loving father tried to protect his child. Claire broke that night, not publicly, not dramatically. She broke the way real people break, quietly, invisibly, in the dark. She sat on the bathroom floor at Tom's apartment at 3 a.m, back against the cold tile, knees pulled to her chest, and thought, maybe he is right. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe Jessica would be better off with a father who can give her a real home instead of a mother sleeping on her uncle's couch. The thought was so dark and so seductive that she almost let it swallow her. Then there was a knock at the door. Small knuckles. Jessica's voice, sleepy and scared. "Mom? I had a bad dream. Can I sleep with you?" Claire opened the door. Jessica crawled into her lap, smelling like strawberry shampoo and laundry detergent, and pressed her face against Claire's shoulder and fell back asleep in 30 seconds. Claire held her daughter in the dim light of that tiny bathroom and made a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a movie decision, a quiet, exhausted, desperate decision made by a woman who had nothing left except the child in her arms. She was going to fight. Karen Webb operated out of a converted Victorian house on Main Street in Maplewood. The sign outside read, "Webb Family Law," and the waiting room smelled like lavender and printer ink. On Karen's desk sat a coffee mug that said, "You have the right to remain fabulous," and on the wall behind her hung a framed quote, "Justice is what love looks like in public." Karen was in her late 40s, 5'3", with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her head and an energy that suggested she ran on espresso and righteous fury. She had spent 20 years representing women who had been underestimated, underpaid, and undermined, and she had the win record to prove it. Claire sat across from her on a Tuesday morning, holding a folder that contained Ray Dalton's surveillance photos, the credit card statements, the LLC records, and a timeline she had written on the back of a grocery list because she did not have a legal pad at 3 a.m. Karen looked through the file. She turned pages slowly, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine alarm. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at Claire. "Honey," she said, "we are not just going to win. We are going to make him wish he had kept his pants on and his mouth shut." Despite everything, Claire almost smiled. Karen moved fast. Within a week, she filed an emergency motion with the family court for temporary spousal support, restoration of Claire's access to the Birch Lane property, and an immediate freeze on all marital assets. The motion included Ray's documentation, the bank records, and a declaration from Claire detailing the Thanksgiving ambush. The judge granted it. On a cold December morning, Claire walked back into her house on Birch Lane for the first time since Thanksgiving. Natalie's suitcase was gone. Ethan's things were still there, but the house felt different, emptier, like the walls knew what had happened inside them. Claire went to Jessica's room. The stuffed rabbit was on the bed. right where Jessica had left it. Claire picked it up and held it against her face and stood there for a long time, breathing in the smell of her daughter's room. The smell of safety and innocence and everything she was fighting for. Things were looking up. She had a lawyer. She had evidence. She had momentum. The court had sided with her. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. That was when everything went wrong again. Richard Cross, Ethan's attorney, filed a counter motion that landed like a grenade. The allegation was explosive. Claire Whitfield was having an affair of her own with Raymond Dalton, the private investigator she had hired. Cross presented photographs. Claire getting into Ray's car at night. Claire in Ray's office, visible through the window, leaning across his desk. Time stamps that looked damning. A narrative that looked devastating. The images were real, but the story was fiction. Every meeting was professional. Every car ride was for surveillance review. But without context, the photos told a completely different story. The judge ordered a full investigation. Claire's emergency protections were suspended pending review. Karen slammed her hand on her desk so hard the fabulous mug jumped. Those photos are from the investigation. He was working for her. I know that, Karen said, rubbing her temples. You know that, but now we have to prove it, and that takes time we do not have. That night, Ethan called. His voice was smooth, almost tender. The voice he used when he wanted something and knew exactly how to get it. Claire, just sign the papers. Take the settlement. $50,000 in shared custody. Walk away. It is better for Jessica. $50,000. 12 years of marriage, reduced to a number that would not cover 2 years of rent. Claire sat at the kitchen table that night, the settlement agreement in front of her, a pen in her hand. The house was quiet. Jessica was asleep upstairs. Outside, the December wind pushed against the windows like something trying to get in. She thought about signing. She thought about how easy it would be to stop fighting. She thought about how tired she was, how deep in her bones exhausted, and how simple it would be to take the money and disappear. Meg appeared in the doorway. She had a key to the house because Claire had given her one years ago, and she used it now like the emergency it was. Put the pen down, Meg said. Meg, I am so tired. I know, but you did not survive Thanksgiving and a lockout and a bank heist to sign away your life for grocery money. Put the pen down, Claire. Claire put the pen down. Meg sat beside her. They did not speak for a long time. Then Meg said, Do you remember junior year? That Shakespeare paper you almost failed because you were too scared to argue with Professor Morrison? Claire almost laughed. I got a B+ because I made you rewrite it and actually fight for your thesis. You are good at fighting, Claire. You just keep forgetting. The investigation into the affair, allegation, took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of suspended protections. 3 weeks of Ethan living in the house while Claire waited. 3 weeks of whispers in Maplewood. But Karen was relentless. Ray provided his PI license, his case file, his phone records, and the signed contract with Claire dated weeks before their first meeting. He testified in a deposition that was so thorough and so dry that even Cross had nothing to work with. The judge reinstated Claire's protections and issued a formal reprimand to Cross for presenting misleading evidence. Karen called Claire from the courthouse steps, and Claire could hear her grinning through the phone. We are back in business, kid. And now he knows we do not scare easy. Claire exhaled for what felt like the first time in a month. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Karen was confident. They would get the house, fair custody, possibly alimony. Claire began to believe she might actually survive this. She should have known better. Natalie Carr called on a Tuesday evening. Unknown number. Claire almost did not answer. Mrs. Whitfield, this is Natalie. Please do not hang up. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. Every instinct said to hang up. Every rational thought said nothing good could come from talking to the woman her husband had chosen over her. But there was something in Natalie's voice, a tremor, a crack in the composure that Claire recognized because she had heard it in her own voice for months. "I need to see you," Natalie said, "in person. It is about Ethan, and it is about the baby." They met at a diner 2 towns over, a place where nobody from Maplewood would see them. Natalie was already in a booth when Claire arrived, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not touched. She looked different from the composed woman at Thanksgiving, smaller, scared, her pregnant belly pressed against the edge of the table. Claire sat down. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Claire said, "Why are you calling me?" Natalie slid a folder across the table. Her fingers were shaking. "He told me your marriage was over 2 years ago," Natalie began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told me you were separated. He told me the house was his. He told me he stayed for Jessica's sake, but that you had checked out emotionally and he was lonely and lost. And I believed him because he was convincing and charming, and I was 31 and tired of being alone, and he made me feel like I mattered." She paused, swallowed hard. "Last week, he told me if I did not sign a sworn statement saying I heard you planning to hide assets and destroy evidence, he would make sure I never saw this baby. He said he had lawyers who could take custody before I even left the hospital. And that was when I realized he does not love me either. I am just the next version of you." The words hung in the air between them. 2 women sitting across from each other in a vinyl booth, connected by the same man's lies. Claire looked at the folder. "What is in here?" "Everything," Natalie said. "The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the crypto wallets, a property in North Carolina under my name that I did not know about until a month ago. He listed me as co-signer on accounts I have never seen. I am in this as deep as you are, and I did not even know it." Claire opened the folder. Pages of bank statements, transfer records, LLC filings. The scope of Ethan's financial deception was staggering. He had been moving money for over a year, layering it through companies and accounts and names, building an escape route so elaborate that it looked less like a divorce plan and more like an evacuation. Karen had found pieces. Ray had found pieces. But Natalie had the complete picture. $2.3 million hidden across a web of entities that spanned 3 states. Claire stared at the numbers. Her voice was barely audible. So the whole marriage, the whole last year, all of it was performance. Natalie nodded. "For both of us." Silence. Claire closed the folder. She looked at Natalie, really looked at her, and saw not the enemy she had imagined, but a woman who had been manipulated by the same man using the same playbook. Sometimes your biggest ally comes from the most unexpected place. The other woman is not always your enemy. Sometimes she is another victim. You do not have to be friends. You do not have to forgive. But if someone extends a hand holding the truth, take the truth. "Thank you," Claire said. The 2 hardest words she had ever spoken. They did not hug. They did not become friends. But in that diner booth, over cold tea and a folder full of fraud, 2 women who had been played by the same man made an unspoken agreement. He does not get to win. When Claire brought the folder to Karen, the attorney sat in silence for a full minute, reading. Then she looked up. "He did not just cheat on you, Claire. He built a financial escape hatch. He has been planning to leave you bankrupt for over a year while smiling at you across the dinner table." Claire nodded. She had already cried about this. She was done crying about this. "So what do we do?" Karen straightened in her chair. "We do what we have been doing. We build the case, but now we build it bigger, and we build it airtight. Because when this goes in front of a judge, I want there to be zero question about who Ethan Whitfield really is." There was one more piece, Ray had been digging into the Whitfield family finances at Karen's request, looking for patterns, and he found something nobody expected. He called Claire on a Thursday night. "Kid, you are going to want to sit down for this." "I am already sitting down, Ray." "What is it?" "Your father-in-law, the good Pastor David Whitfield. 30 years ago, he had an affair, a woman named Lillian Brooks. There was a child, a son, born in 1994. David paid to keep it quiet. The money came from the church building fund. Eleanor never knew. Claire closed her eyes. Of course there was more. And here's the part that matters, Ray continued. Ethan found out when he was 16. He confronted his father, and David told him that a real man protects the family image no matter what. That is what love is. That is what David Whitfield taught his son about marriage. That deception is love. That image is reality. That women are managed, not partnered with. Claire sat with this for a long time after she hung up. She was not going to use David's secret to destroy an old man's life. That was not who she was. But she understood now, with a clarity that felt like cold water, where Ethan had learned to lie so fluently. He was not born this way, he was made. December in Maplewood was postcard perfect. Snow on the town green, lights strung along Main Street, the smell of pine and cinnamon drifting from every shop. Christmas was coming, and the town was performing its annual ritual of warmth and togetherness, the same way Ethan had performed his marriage. Beautifully, convincingly, hollow at the center. Claire was at Tom's kitchen table, which had become the unofficial war room. Karen's files were stacked on one end, Ray's surveillance photos on the other. Meg had brought a whiteboard from her garage and propped it against the refrigerator, and on it she had written a timeline of events in red marker with an enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting her entire life for a conspiracy board. "Okay," Meg said, tapping the whiteboard with the wooden spoon she was using as a pointer. "Christmas Eve. Ethan invited the whole family to another dinner at the house. He is calling it a reconciliation." Tom leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "And Claire is going. For some reason." Claire looked up from the documents she was reviewing. "He invited me publicly, in front of Jessica. If I refuse, it feeds his narrative that I am the unreasonable one." Karen, joining by speakerphone, added, "She is right, and frankly, this is an opportunity. Ethan thinks he is winning. He thinks the custody motion has Claire on the defensive. He does not know about Natalie's cooperation. He does not know about the offshore accounts. He does not know what we have," Tom frowned. "So we just walk in there and drop a bomb on Christmas Eve?" "There will be a kid in that house, my niece." Claire shook her head. "Jessica will be here with you, Tom. I already arranged it. She thinks she is having a Christmas Eve sleepover with Uncle Tom and Meg. Meg is bringing gingerbread supplies and that terrible movie she loves." Meg gasped. "The holiday is not terrible, it is a masterpiece of seasonal cinema." The room almost felt normal for a second. Almost. Claire turned to the phone. "Karen, what do I need?" Karen's voice was crisp and precise. "The divorce papers, revised with full financial disclosure. Natalie's recanting affidavit. The offshore account records. And the DNA test." The DNA test. Claire had almost forgotten, or maybe she had been trying to forget. After Natalie's visit, Karen had suggested a paternity verification, done through proper legal channels with Natalie's full consent. The results had come back 2 days ago. Ethan Whitfield was not the father of Natalie's baby. The man who had paraded his pregnant girlfriend at Thanksgiving dinner, who had destroyed his marriage and his family's reputation for the sake of this child, this legacy, this proof of his virility and freedom, was not even the father. Claire had read the results 3 times before she believed them. Then she had set the paper down and laughed, not a happy laugh, The kind of laugh that escapes when the absurdity of your situation finally outweighs the pain. He burned down his whole life for a lie, she said to Karen. And now, Karen replied, we are going to let him know it. Claire spent the next 3 days preparing with a focus that bordered on obsession. She rehearsed her composure in the mirror. She practiced keeping her voice steady. She reviewed the documents until she could reference page numbers from memory. Ray came by to confirm logistics. I will be at the bar across the street, he said. Button camera, recording everything in case we need it. Claire nodded. And the reporter? Margaret Chin, from the Hartford Courant, Ray said. She has been investigating Whitfield commercial properties for 6 months on a tip about zoning irregularities. She does not know about the dinner. I just made sure she would be in the neighborhood. Coincidence? Claire almost smiled. You are good at coincidences, Ray. Kid, I am the best. Tom appeared in the doorway, holding a wrench. I will be in the truck. Engine running. You do not have to come, Claire said. Tom looked at her the way he had looked at her since they were kids, since she was 7 and he was 12, and she fell off her bike, and he carried her home without saying a word. He said, Yeah, I do. On Christmas Eve morning, Claire stood in front of her bedroom mirror. She put on a simple black dress. No jewelry, minimal makeup. She looked at herself for a long time. The woman looking back was not the same woman who had found a receipt in a glove compartment. That woman had been afraid. This woman was tired and bruised and had lost 20 pounds and gained an understanding of the world that she would have given anything not to need. But she was not afraid. She picked up her bag. Inside were 3 envelopes, white, blue, gold. She checked each one, sealed, labeled, ready. She walked downstairs. Jessica was at the kitchen table, decorating gingerbread men with Meg, who had flour in her hair and was singing off-key to Christmas music. Mom, you look pretty, Jessica said. Claire knelt down and kissed her daughter's forehead. You be good for Uncle Tom tonight, okay? I will be back before you wake up. Jessica nodded. Then she said, Mom, are you going to be okay? Claire looked at her daughter. This impossibly brave 11-year-old who had held her hair in a gas station parking lot and never once complained about sleeping on a couch. And she said, Yes, baby, I am going to be more than okay. She meant it. The Whitfield house on Birch Lane was lit up like a department store. White lights along the roofline. A wreath on the door. Candles in every window. It looked like a Christmas card, which was exactly the point. Ethan Whitfield did not do anything without an audience in mind. Claire pulled into the driveway at 6:55. She sat in her car for 1 minute, breathing. Then she picked up her bag, checked the envelopes one more time, and walked to the front door. Ethan opened it himself. He was wearing a dark green sweater, sleeves pushed up, looking relaxed and handsome and completely in control. He smiled like she was a guest and not the woman whose life he had systematically dismantled. Claire, he said warmly, Merry Christmas. Come in. She stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted ham and pine. The long dining table was set for 15. Crystal glasses. Her good china, the china she had picked out for their wedding registry. Candles down the center. Soft music playing. The guests were already there. Pastor David and Eleanor. Ethan's sister Catherine and her husband. 3 couples from church, 2 business associates, and Natalie, seated near the end of the table in a dark blue dress. Her pregnant belly, prominent. Her face carefully neutral. Claire caught Natalie's eye, the smallest nod, barely visible, but enough. Karen Webb was seated at the table too. Ethan had been told she was Claire's friend from her teaching days. He had not questioned it. He was too confident to question anything. Dinner was served, ham, roasted potatoes, green beans. Pastor David said grace, his voice deep and practiced, thanking God for forgiveness and second chances. Claire noticed Eleanor's hands were clenched in her lap. Conversation moved in careful circles. The weather, the holidays, Catherine's children. Nobody mentioned Thanksgiving. Nobody mentioned the divorce. The elephant in the room was wearing a party hat, and everyone was pretending it was a centerpiece. Ethan stood halfway through the meal. He tapped his glass. The room quieted. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began. "This year has been difficult. I have made mistakes. But I believe in family, and I believe in second chances. And I want this Christmas to be the beginning of something new." He paused for effect. He was good at pauses. "I have asked Claire here tonight because I want us to find a way forward. For Jessica. For all of us." He sat down to polite applause. He looked at Claire with an expression that was probably meant to be sincere. Claire waited 3 seconds. Then she stood. The room shifted. Something in the air changed. The way barometric pressure drops before a storm. "Ethan asked me here tonight because he believes in new beginnings," Claire said. Her voice was steady and clear and carried to every corner of the room. "I believe in them too, so I would like to share some truths as we begin again." She reached into her bag and placed the first envelope on the table. White, heavy, official. "This is a revised divorce filing," she said. "Inside, you will find a complete financial disclosure that includes every account my husband tried to hide. Offshore holdings, shell companies, a property in North Carolina, crypto wallets, $2.3 million that he funneled out of our joint accounts over the past 14 months. The room went silent. Ethan's smile collapsed like a building losing its foundation. "Claire," he started. She continued as if he had not spoken. She placed the second envelope on the table. Blue. "This is a sworn affidavit from Natalie Carr, recanting the false statement she was coerced into signing by my husband. In it, she details how Ethan threatened to take custody of her unborn child if she did not lie to the court about me." Every head turned to Natalie. She was shaking, but she met Ethan's eyes. Her voice was small, but clear. "He told me the marriage was already over. He told me I was his future. He told me a lot of things that were not true. And last week, he told me if I did not lie for him, he would make sure I never held my own baby." Ethan's face went white. "Natalie, what have you done?" Natalie's chin lifted. "What you should have done a long time ago." I told the truth. Claire placed the third envelope on the table. Gold. The room seemed to hold its breath. "This is a certified DNA paternity test," Claire said, "conducted through proper legal channels." Natalie consented. "The results are notarized and documented." She opened the envelope and laid the paper flat on the table so everyone could see the words, printed in clinical black and white. "Paternity result excluded. 0% match." The sound that followed was not silence. It was implosion. The sound of a carefully constructed life collapsing inward. Ethan stared at the paper. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That is impossible. You forged this. You are trying to destroy me." Karen Webb stood from her seat. Her voice was calm and professional and devastating. "Certified laboratory, documented chain of custody, notarized results. I would be delighted to defend every syllable of this in court, Mr. Whitfield. And based on the financial evidence, I expect we will be there soon." Pastor David rose slowly from his chair. His face was gray. His voice broke. "Ethan, what have you done?" And Ethan, cornered and crumbling, turned to his father with 30 years of suppressed rage and said the words that cracked the final wall. "What I learned from you." The room went completely still. David sat down. Eleanor looked at her husband with an expression of confused horror that deepened into understanding. 30 years of perfect sermons and perfect smiles and perfect Sundays and in 4 words her son had torn the curtain down. Claire did not explain. That was not her secret to reveal, but the words landed, and everyone at that table felt their weight even if they did not fully understand them. Claire picked up her coat. She looked at Ethan one last time. "I did not come here for revenge," she said quietly. "I came here because you spent 12 years teaching me I was not enough, and I needed to stand in this room, in front of all these people, and prove to myself that I am." She walked toward the door. Meg, who had been sitting in the corner recording nothing but memorizing everything, stood and followed. At the doorway, Meg turned back. She looked at Ethan, then at the table, then at the half-eaten ham and said, "For the record, the sweet potato casserole was always hers. You never deserved it." Claire walked into the cold Christmas Eve air. Snow was falling. Somewhere down the street, a house had its lights on, and she could hear children laughing. She got in her car, sat for a moment, and exhaled. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding, but she was smiling. Not a triumphant smile, a free one. The courtroom in Hartford was larger than Claire had expected. High ceilings, wood paneling, fluorescent lights that flattened everything into harsh reality. No chandeliers here, no candles, just the law, plain and unforgiving. Claire sat beside Karen at the plaintiff's table. She wore a navy blue dress and no jewelry. Her hands were folded in her lap, the way they had been folded through every parent-teacher conference, every church service, every moment in her life when she needed to appear calmer than she felt. Across the aisle, Ethan sat with Richard Cross. He looked diminished. The sweater and the charm were gone, replaced by a gray suit and the hollow expression of a man watching his empire burn. The trial took 4 days. It felt like 4 years. Karen was surgical. She presented the evidence in chronological order, building the narrative brick by brick: the secret apartment, the hidden accounts, the shell companies, the offshore transfers, the LLC that held the North Carolina property, the crypto wallets, every receipt, every timestamp, every digital fingerprint that Ethan thought he had buried. She called Ray Dalton to the stand. Ray, in a rare concession to formality, wore a tie. He presented his surveillance evidence with the flat precision of a man who had testified 100 times and had learned that facts do not need decoration. She called Evelyn Chen from Whitfield Commercial Properties, an accountant who had grown uncomfortable with irregularities in the company books and had quietly cooperated with Karen's team. Evelyn's testimony connected the personal fraud to a broader pattern of financial misconduct at the firm. She called Natalie Carr. Natalie walked to the stand slowly, one hand on her belly. She did not look at Ethan. She was sworn in, and she told the truth, all of it. How she met Ethan at a conference. How he told her his marriage was over. How he moved her into a life that was built on someone else's wreckage. How he threatened her when she wavered. She cried once when she described the moment she realized the man she loved did not exist. He was a character, she said, and I was the audience. Cross tried to discredit her. He suggested she was cooperating for a reduced sentence in the financial fraud case. Natalie looked at him and said, "I am cooperating because my child deserves a mother who tells the truth, even when it costs her everything." The courtroom was quiet after that. Karen's closing argument lasted 20 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not pound the table. She spoke the way Claire had learned to speak, with calm precision and an unshakable belief that the truth, plainly stated, was enough. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not a complicated case. This is a man who made vows and broke them, who earned trust and weaponized it, who took the woman he promised to protect and systematically dismantled her life, her finances, her home, her reputation, and her sense of self. He did this not in a moment of weakness, but over 14 months of calculated, deliberate deception. The evidence is clear. The pattern is documented, and the law is sufficient. She paused. My client is not asking for sympathy. She is asking for justice. And justice, in this case, looks like giving a woman back the life that was stolen from her. The judge, a woman named Helen Archer, who had been on the bench for 22 years and had a reputation for fairness that bordered on legendary, took one day to deliberate. She delivered her ruling on a Friday afternoon. The court finds the evidence of financial fraud and concealment of marital assets to be overwhelming and well documented. The defendant engaged in a sustained pattern of deception that included the creation of shell entities, the diversion of joint funds, and the deliberate financial isolation of his spouse. Claire's hands were shaking under the table. Karen placed her hand over Claire's. Steady. This court awards full ownership of the marital home to Claire Whitfield. Primary custody of the minor child, Jessica Whitfield, is granted to the plaintiff. The defendant shall provide child support as calculated by state guidelines. 70% of all verified marital assets, including recovered hidden funds, are awarded to the plaintiff. The defendant's financial misconduct will be referred to the appropriate authorities for separate criminal proceedings. Claire heard the words, but they did not feel real. They felt like they belonged to someone else's story, someone braver, someone who had planned all of this instead of stumbling through it one terrible day at a time. Ethan was led from the courtroom by his attorney. At the door, he stopped. He turned and looked at Claire. His expression was not angry. It was not defiant. It was broken. The kind of broken that happens when you finally see yourself clearly and do not like what you find. I loved you, he said, in my own way. Claire met his eyes. She did not look away. That is the problem, Ethan. Your way was not love. It was control. And I spent 12 years not knowing the difference. He left. Claire sat in the courtroom after it emptied. Karen packed up her files. Ray stood by the door, hands in his pockets, waiting. How do you feel? Karen asked. Claire thought about the question. She thought about the receipt in the glove compartment, and the woman in the lobby, and the gas station parking lot, and the locks that would not turn, and the $212, and the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. I feel tired, she said, and I feel free, and I am not sure which one is bigger right now. Karen smiled. Give it time. Freedom gets louder. 6 months later, summer had come to Maplewood. The kind of summer that made you forget winter existed. Thick green lawns, sprinklers arcing in the afternoon light, the sound of kids on bicycles and screen doors slamming, and ice cream trucks playing songs that had not changed in 30 years. Claire was in her backyard. Her backyard. The word still felt new. Like a language, she was learning to speak without flinching. The garden she had planted years ago was blooming, tomatoes and basil and the yellow roses that lined the back fence, the ones Ethan had always wanted to pull out because he said they attracted bees. She kept the roses. Jessica was running across the grass, chasing fireflies in the early dusk, holding a mason jar that Tom had punched holes in the lid of. Because Tom was the kind of uncle who still knew how to catch fireflies and considered it an essential life skill. Tom was sitting on the porch steps, drinking a beer and watching Jessica with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose love language was presence. He had built her a treehouse in the backyard last month. It was slightly crooked. Jessica said it was the best treehouse in the entire world. Things were not perfect. Claire wanted to be honest about that, with herself, with anyone who asked. She still had nightmares sometimes, dreams where she was locked out of her own house and could hear Jessica crying inside, but could not reach her. She had started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Rowland, who had an office that smelled like green tea and who never once told Claire to just move on. Some weeks were harder than others. Some mornings, she woke up and the first thought in her head was still something Ethan had said, some casual cruelty disguised as advice. And she had to sit with it and breathe through it and remind herself that his voice was not the truth. Her voice was the truth. She was learning to trust her own voice again. It was slower work than she had expected. Meg had started a support group for women going through divorce. She called it the Wednesday Club because she said the Ex-Wives Club sounded like a reality show and she had standards. They met every Wednesday evening at Meg's house, 6 women so far, and there was always wine, and there were always tears, and there was always laughter, sometimes all 3 at once. Meg had found her calling. She was magnificent at it. Natalie had given birth in March, a boy. She named him James. She and Claire were not friends. They did not call each other or get coffee or pretend that their connection was anything other than what it was. 2 women who had survived the same storm. But Natalie had sent a card when James was born, a simple note that said, "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." Claire had sent flowers, yellow ones. Eleanor Whitfield had left Pastor David in February. At 70 years old, after 47 years of marriage, she packed 2 suitcases and moved into a small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street. She told Claire, over tea in Claire's kitchen, "It is the first time in 50 years I have chosen my own curtains." Claire had not asked about the affair. She figured Eleanor knew by now, in the way wives eventually know everything, and it was not Claire's story to push. Eleanor was rebuilding. That was enough. Pastor David had resigned from Grace Community Church. The official reason was health. The real reason moved through Maplewood's gossip network in whispers, incomplete but damning. He and Eleanor had not spoken since March. And Ethan was awaiting trial on financial fraud charges. He was out on bail, living in a rented apartment in Hartford. His real estate firm dissolved. His assets frozen. His name in the newspaper for reasons that had nothing to do with charity galas or Little League. Claire did not think about him as often as she expected. Some days she did not think about him at all, and those days felt like small victories. On a warm evening in July, Claire was sitting on the porch after Jessica had gone to bed. The fireflies were still out, blinking their slow Morse code across the dark yard. The house was quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that felt like peace instead of absence. Her phone buzzed. A text from Meg. "Book Club Thursday. We are reading something happy this time. No cheating husbands." I checked. Claire laughed. A real laugh, the kind that started in her belly and rose up through her chest and came out sounding like relief and joy and survival all at once. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that. Maybe at Tom's birthday in June, when Jessica had put too many candles on the cake and set off the smoke detector, and Tom had stood in the kitchen with the fire extinguisher looking like he was prepared to die for that cake. Maybe that was the thing about starting over. You did not get your old life back. You did not get the 12 years refunded or the innocence restored. But you got new moments, small ones, ordinary ones. A daughter catching fireflies, a brother building a crooked treehouse, a best friend who showed up with wine, and a conspiracy board when your world collapsed and never once left. Jessica had found an old family photo a few weeks ago, Claire, Ethan, and Jessica at the beach, 3 years ago, all smiling. Jessica had held it up and asked the question Claire had been dreading. "Were we ever happy, Mom?" Claire had taken the photo. She looked at it for a long time, at her own smile, which she now recognized as real, at Jessica's sandy hair and missing front tooth, at Ethan's arm around her shoulder, which she now understood was not affection, but ownership. "We were, baby. she said. Those parts were real, and the happy parts are yours to keep. But sometimes being brave means building a new kind of happy, and that is what we are doing. Jessica had nodded, satisfied with the answer in the way only a child can be, and gone back to her gingerbread house, which was structurally unsound and covered in too much frosting and absolutely perfect. Claire sat on the porch now and watched the fireflies. She thought about the woman she had been 14 months ago, the one who found a receipt and told herself it was nothing. She thought about the woman at the gas station, vomiting on the asphalt while her daughter held her hair. She thought about the woman on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, wondering if she was the problem. She wanted to go back and tell that woman something, not the ending, because the ending was not the point. She wanted to tell her that the worst night of her life would not be the last night of her life, that the silence she wore like armor would become the silence of choice instead of fear, that her daughter would be okay, that she would be okay, that the quietest voice at the table would turn out to be the loudest truth. If you are watching this and something in Claire's story felt familiar, if you have ever been made to feel small by someone who promised to love you, I want you to hear this. You are not crazy, you are not overreacting, and you are not alone. The first step is not leaving. The first step is believing you deserve better. And you do. You always did. Claire set her phone down on the porch railing. She pulled her knees up to her chest and watched the last fireflies of the evening blink out, one by one, until the yard was dark and quiet and hers. Tomorrow there would be coffee with Meg, and a staff meeting at school and Jessica's soccer game at 4, and a grocery list she kept forgetting to finish. Tomorrow would be ordinary. And ordinary, she had learned, was the most extraordinary thing in the world when you had fought to earn it. She stood. She stretched. She walked inside and locked the door, her door, and climbed the stairs past Jessica's room, where she paused to listen to her daughter breathing, slow and steady and safe. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time, she slept without dreaming. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real emotional value. Every character, every scene, and every word was crafted with one purpose: to give strength, perspective, and hope to anyone who has ever felt silenced. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of a community that believes stories can change lives.